Hello and welcome to another episode of the 21st Century Work-Life Podcast. This is, I would call it a bonus episode, but given the frequency with which I'm releasing bonus episodes, then just welcome to an episode. If we haven't met before, my name is Pilar Orti and I am the director of Virtual Not Distant, which is the company behind this show. So what I have for you today is a conversation I had, I think it was probably a couple of months ago now, definitely a month ago, with Judy Rees, who is one of the online event consultants at Rees McCann. And the reason why I had this conversation with her and we recorded was that they have just launched a course to help people move their events online. So she'll tell you about that right at the end of our conversation. But also, with more companies either going fully distributed or adopting a hybrid model, which I hope means that it's an office optional model, not a you must be in the office this number of days a week model. But, take your pick. It's a very difficult choice. With that, I'm really thinking that we have to make decisions about how important location is or isn't, depending on what we're doing. And we really need to think about this. And one of the things that we need to reconsider is how do we bring people together in our organization? And also, where are the opportunities for learning from each other? And then we can take into account the office space, the non-office, whether it's home, co-working, so a remote space, an online space. Is the space asynchronous or synchronous? There are lots of choices now. Before, we didn't have as much choice because we didn't understand, mainly as the traditional workplace hadn't experienced the online space. Now we have. So now we have a choice, and sometimes having a choice makes things a little bit more complex. I'm going to say complex. I hope that's the right word. So that's why I wanted to bring Judy in. She's been on the show before. She's been in the online space for ages. So I'm inviting you to think about the different things to take into consideration when moving an event online or choosing whether it's going to be online or not. So something that's also interesting about Judy's journey through the space is that, in a way like me, she had to make a decision of where to niche down, where to provide value to other people, given what's happened, given that there's been such an explosion of moving online of all sorts of things, and also such an explosion of offerings in the online space. So she's gone one way. We are going another. I will tell you about it after the conversation with Judy. It makes sense to go where we're going. I'm really excited about it. We're not there yet. So I think that that is interesting from that point of view. We also talk about how the internet can help with inclusivity. We just touch on that. Well, she touches on that right at the end. And I think it's always worth thinking about that and not losing perspective of the fact that online can really help to bring more people on board and engage more people. Of course, that also has it's also limited, but just like the physical space is limited, the online space is limited. But it's really interesting to be looking at that. Now, before I go on to the conversation, I wanted to share something else that I picked up from a podcast that you might be interested in. It's called Brave New Work, and it's by The Ready. There's a book by the same name. And this show is really about transforming the workplace into a more self-managed space, but it's really about transforming the workplace into something better, more modern, less hierarchical. And they really look at it from the self-management point of view. There's lots to learn from, even if you're not going down that road. There's lots to learn about what a modern workplace could feel like. So I recommend that show. But in particular, they have a recent show which is called This and That, This and That, where they answer listener questions. And they answered the question, and I think it's very relevant to today's topic, about, okay, how do we do an all hands online? An all hands meeting where the whole company turns up, and usually senior leadership has presentations and everyone else listens. And it did remind me of someone I know who we're recording in May 2021. So maybe August 2020, they had an all hands, as in company meeting, organization meeting. And this person turned up. It was in Zoom, but it was a webinar Zoom. Okay, fine. It's lots of people. The chat was closed. So you couldn't even see who else was on the call. And that was a classic not thinking about what you're doing in this medium. The employees hadn't seen each other for ages. The workplace was still closed. And this person was so excited, like, oh, I wonder who'll be there. He didn't know who was there. So these kinds of things, especially if you're someone who's in charge that hasn't experienced the online space, because why would you? You might not have needed to. These kind of things are the things we need to be thinking about. Some of the stuff that they talked about in Brave New Work was adopting a more creator-led approach if we need communication. So if you have a presentation or if you have to give information, again, is there an asynchronous way in which you can do it so people can go through that information in their own time? And then when you bring everyone together online, do it in a way that uses the time the best. So, and ask me anything or clarification questions, or I really liked this. They suggested also rotating from different functions to lead the all hands meetings. So again, instead of always having the same people that you would expect to be hearing from, rotate it with the teams. Give voice to people whose work is really invisible in the organization. Can those people play a major role in the all hands meetings? Can you give them visibility in that way? And given that everyone's online, there's no reason why we couldn't do that. And I think that's really it. We're changing how we're working again, because we were a lot of people in the office. Then we were all working from home. And now we've got to reinvent how we work again. Avoid trying to emulate as much as possible what there was before. This is a new space. If you're going hybrid, it's a new space. You now have a choice of location, I hope. You need to start to rethink, okay, how is this going to work? This is different to everyone working from home. And even if you continue as a distributed company, it's going to feel different because the context is going to change. Honestly, whatever way we're going, let's have a think. So enough from me for now. I'm going to introduce Judy Rees again, who's an online events consultant at Rees McCann. And here she is at the beginning of the conversation telling me about the kind of online events she helps with, and actually what does she mean by online events?
When we're thinking about online events, we keep tossing around, well, should we call ourselves online events, online gatherings? Because where we focus our attention is getting people together online synchronously, that is in real time, so all together. And we focus on gatherings of between about, sort of a dozen and more than 300 people. We're not in the space of huge conferences of thousands. And we're not really specialists in online meetings as such, but anything sort of in between a meeting and a conference is something that we focus on. So we include in our definition training workshops, we include things like strategy workshops, we include things like communities of practice getting together, organisations, membership organisations bringing their groups together, and unconferences and bar camps and all kinds of gatherings where the human-to-human connection is at least as important as the broadcasting of information.
So one question though, why did you pick that size of people? It's quite specific. I know that there'll be fluidity, but it's interesting that you say, okay, not the much smaller and not the really big ones.
Well, it wasn't so much a conscious choice as what I found myself and we found ourselves doing. Before the COVID lockdowns, we had done lots of work in the remote meetings space and also plenty of work in this remote gatherings space. But there were not many other people who'd done what I'd done and built online video unconferences, and in a successful way, where people were coming out of those events and saying that was actually better than being in the room together. We've had a brilliant time. the online unconference that I founded 5 years ago, Meta Forum, we've talked about this before. We run it for 12 or 13 hours a day, once a year. And people just love it. They stay online all day. We have to force them to take meal breaks offline because they're so excited at being connected with this relatively small group of people. And I cap that event at about 150 people per event. Now, 150, as a lot of listeners will know, is a very interesting number. It's Dunbar's number. It's the number of people who can reasonably connect with each other. It's the size of the tribe. Once you go much over that, people find it really difficult to stay connected with each other. Up to that, you can have lots of sub-tribes. So I got into this because while lots of people were doing online meetings, not many people were doing events of this size remotely. And when the COVID lockdowns came, there were lots of people who needed this. So that's what I've spent the last year diving deeply into.
Especially those who had something coming up and they wanted, I don't want to cancel. Can we just transfer it online? How do we do it, Judy?
Yeah, that got fun. The very first one that I did working with a couple of colleagues was for a large charitable organisation who had their European conference all booked to happen in Belgium. And then we took it online with 3 weeks notice or thereabouts, which, you shouldn't really do with that length of time. But it went really, really well. And of course, people missed the chocolate, but they didn't miss the personal connection.
Good. So just a couple of things for listeners. So Judy was talking about the Meta Forum, was it an unconference around clean language and metaphor, Judy? Is that how you would describe it?
Yes, and it's not quite an unconference. I had a lively discussion with people who really understand the distinctions between bar camps, unconferences, open space technology, all this stuff. But the general sense is it's in that kind of unconferencey kind of space for people who are interested in my other specialist subject, clean language.
And that's great because the online space gives people who are interested, again, in a specialism to gather together, because maybe they wouldn't be able to gather with so many people in their own location because of very specialist interest. So listeners, I refer you to another podcast that I'm involved in where Judy talked a bit more about the Meta Forum, just almost straight off after the event, end of 2020, from the podcast Facilitation Stories. And you can look for episode 28 if you're interested in that. Let's go a little bit more about, so what are you've already started to talk about the kind of events. So what is your role as an online events consultant? And has this changed? Has how you help people change pre and COVID during post-COVID?
Yes, I think as an organisation, we've become much clearer about where we can add the most value. Mm-hmm. What we've realised is that the biggest value is in designing online events so that human-to-human connection is inevitable, and so that a wide diversity of people, interests and so forth can be included in the event design. What we found, if we joined later in the process, after they'd already fixed what the design was going to be, it was very, very difficult to add human-to-human connection once they'd already decided how they were going to run the thing. If we were in there at the start, we could say, look, stop with this webinar format of 45 minutes of somebody talking over slides followed by Q&A. That's not highly engaging. Instead, we can design things so that participants are involved even before the big day, so that they are they're engaged in creating the event. They understand that they're going to show up ready to participate. They know how they're going to contribute, and they've done some preparation beforehand. And then you give them ways in all the way through the event. Even if there are some chunks where there's a speaker, the conversations around the speaker still happen. The conversations which in the room would be happening in the coffee area or the bar or in an event I'm working on at the moment, that when they're in a hotel space, their favourite place to have conversations is around the pool. So they want us to create a virtual pool area for them to hang out, have a drink of something, just sit and talk about the stuff that they want to talk about, which will be sparked by the speaker, will have some connection to their shared interest, but new ideas and all sorts of new stuff, new partnerships, new collaborations will emerge from those side conversations. And for an awful lot of people who go to conferences, that's why they went. Not because of the speakers. The speakers were a sort of bonus. The reason I certainly went to conferences was to meet people, because that's where the ideas emerge.
And I hope that some of that methodology also will stay when people start to then design conferences in person, because I find that as well. Sometimes conferences in person are the equivalent of the webinar. However, because you have the breaks where you can mingle with other people, that's where the added value is. But it'll be really nice also to see all that preparation, all that indicating to people, look, we want you also to be part of that. Maybe not even the creation of it, but you are part of the experience and signaling that with stuff that happens beforehand. That would be really nice as well.
And really high quality in the room people put energy into that, but they may not realize that they were doing it. I was talking this morning to somebody from Lean Agile Global, which is the online edition of Lean Agile London. When it was Lean Agile London, the organisers went out of their way to introduce people to each other and say, you should talk to so-and-so over here because he shares your interest in such a thing. You should go and talk to them because they come from such a place. You should go and talk to them because they've previously worked at the organisation you work at. They put real energy into introducing people so that everybody felt included right from the moment they walked through the door. Now, the question becomes, how do you do that online? If you're willing to invest the same level of energy into it online, you can still make it work online. But if you just pretend it doesn't need doing, it's not going to happen.
And it's quite a nice occasion to break down, especially for people. I'm going to just refer to conferences and more of more like conferences, smaller conferences, where organizers, like you say, you've been doing things already to generate that sense of community, to foster connections. So maybe also it's time to go, okay, what is it that we've been doing that we didn't even see we were doing? It was so much in our way of operating that we don't even realize we're doing it. And then start from there and go, okay, well, if that is still important, how do we then do it online? I hadn't thought of that. It's similar to some of the ways of working that we've had co-located in the office. It's a lot of stuff, lots of exchange of information, things we do, we don't even think about them. And yet when we transfer online, we've got to go, hang on, if we want that to happen, we need to realize it needs doing and we need to plan to do it.
Absolutely.
What have been some of the most challenging either events or things you've had to do?
The most challenging are the ones where people have already made the plan and they've already bought the technology and they've spent an outrageous amount of money on a technology which doesn't allow engagement. So there are a lot of these conference tools which are born from in-the-room events, and they were created to provide a streaming service for in-the-room events. If your event is only a streaming thing, why on earth would anybody ever turn up live? You know, they're going to have access for a whole year to all these talks. Why would they bother taking time in their calendar to turn up to your event live? So the most challenging events are when all those decisions have already been taken, the money's been spent, and they say, can you just make it engaging? And the answer is really no. You know, there are some little tiny things we can do, but fundamentally you've had your chips.
I've been in a few events recently which were just trying to replicate what the conference was, the conference model that a lot of people are used to in the co-located space online, which was main speaker with a talk and then everyone else connecting in the chat. What I was thinking is that sometimes that works for communities that are already quite strong, because in a sense that is enough for them to be able to turn up live. Is that they're happy to say, like, see their heroes talking, and they're, you know, the people who represent the community. It's a bit like, I was listening to a podcast this morning where they were talking about the Queen. So it's a bit like, you know, seeing the famous people live, and then they were happy to then just say hello and see each other on the chat. Again, a missed opportunity for people really to be engaging. But also I think that knowing the history of the people who are going to turn up, I imagine, is also very important. What history do these people have? Do they have a strong history, or do they have no history? Would that then differ how we're planning for the event, Judy?
It depends what kind of event you want to have. There's nothing wrong with broadcasts. You know, we all watch the television and listen to the radio, listen to podcasts. There's nothing wrong with broadcasts, but they're not designed to, in and of themselves, to engage people. Now, if your group of people are already used to sending each other text messages in a forum or whatever, they'll carry on doing that in the chat. If, on the other hand, what you want to do with your event is create more spontaneous conversations, the chat isn't going to work. If someone starts a whole new subject in the chat of someone's presentation, that's rude, isn't it? It's taking the topic off in another direction, and it's not a polite thing to do. I think there are better ways.
So what kind of events work better online than co-located? Because I'm sure there are. Again, it will, the aim of them will differ, but is there anything, a specific type of event or an event with certain characteristics or certain aims that you think might be actually working better online? I'm thinking of when people start to reconsider whether this is something we should continue doing online or take back to a physical space. What are some of the things we might be thinking about?
Where people are a specialist subject area, and you want people from multiple parts of the globe in this event in order for the event to work well, or indeed any other particular diversity is needed for the event to work well. One of the most fun events I did this last year was one for a local community in Tor Bay, where previously they would have a conference in the local leisure centre once a year, a community conference where the council would, you know, engage with the community, all that palaver. What they discovered when we did it online was they got far wider diversity of people involved when it was online than when it was in the room. There were people there in their 90s who could join the online event. They wouldn't have dreamt of travelling into town, into Paignton, to go to the in-person event. It was too far, it was too difficult, there was no parking, etc., etc., etc. Online, you can have more diversity. You almost certainly have more different countries represented. You can have a wider range of ages represented. You will almost certainly have more women and more older people online than if it was in the room. So where you want more diversity, have it online.
And you've now started to You've developed a course about how to help people just to start thinking about doing this. And it's called Engaging Online Events, the Complete Step-by-Step Guide. And I was looking through it and there was something that struck me that I'd never thought of. And it's the development of a security protocol and troubleshooting plan. What are some of the things that we need to be paying attention to that maybe we hadn't thought of before?
Just to be clear, that when we say the complete step-by-step guide, it is intended to be the complete step-by-step guide, not just a start you thinking. We can't keep up with all the work that's coming our way, so we did a big brain dump. What's everything somebody could need in order to run their own highly engaging online event? And we've crammed all that into the course, including all our templates, all our email things that we send out, all that kind of stuff and all our checklists is all in the course. So our security protocol piece, it started life early in the COVID era when there was all that stuff about Zoom bombing, if you remember.
Yes.
When it became a thing that you had to be careful what you did, or else your event could be invaded by strangers. And while Zoom did various things to tighten up their security, it's not actually about the tools security. It's actually about how you think about the boundaries of your event. If you want an event to be open to everybody, literally everybody, at the drop of a hat, completely spontaneous, you therefore you have to limit the ways people engage. So that's another reason people do the standard webinar format, which is just a broadcast. On the other hand, if you have a highly engaging event, that means that people are going to show themselves on camera. It means they're going to be able to speak. They're going to be able to share documents, etc. And that means you will need to set some kind of boundary on the outside. People need to, at the very least, register. Otherwise, you are leaving yourself open to people doing the unpleasant things that happened during the Zoom bombing era, people sharing nasty pictures, coming in and screaming, all those kind of things. So that's why you need to balance an approach to security with the degree of openness you want in your event.
Really fascinating, and I hope that the tech will help us more and more as it is, because it is something we didn't used to have that in the good old days. When I never had anyone crash. Or had you ever had an online event being crashed before COVID?
Crashed, not really, but I have had people show up to events expecting something they weren't going to get, and then being somewhat disruptive.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
There'd been a misunderstanding. They'd read something that I'd written about the event, and they'd arrived wanting something it just wasn't. Now, when you're online, you can do something that you couldn't do in the room, which is you can mute them. You can even chuck them off the call without needing to be physically strong.
Yes.
But notice that, of course, in the room, people would have paid a lot more attention to the details of the event. If they're going to travel, let's say, into central London for an event, they stop and think about it because it's more effort. If they can just press a button to join, they may not pay much attention to what they're joining. It's all part of balancing this stuff out.
The amount of effort it takes to get somewhere really affects also how you show up. And like you say, and how prepared you come and how much effort you're willing to put into being part of the success of that event as well. Yeah, good. So, Judy, I think that the best thing to do would be to direct listeners to your website. Well, unless you want me to direct them to somewhere else.
No, reesmccann.com is a good place to go.
So Rees, REESMCCANN.com. Anything? Were you going to say somewhere else as well?
No, I was just going to say on there you can sign up for my link letter, which is a weekly digest of stuff from around the web about this kind of subject, which more than 3,000 people get and find interesting.
Excellent. Well, listeners, I'm subscribed, so I can vouch for that. Lots of really great stuff coming in through the email. We're still using email, Judy.
Yep.
Amazing.
Still works.
So thank you very much, Judy, for coming to the show again. She's been on the show a few times, yes. And she lives also quite near me in London, which is interesting. But we still do have lots of meetings online. So if you're still here and want to hang around for another 10 minutes, you're very welcome. If not, I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Judy mainly. And I just wanted to let you know a couple of things that I'm doing. And also I was talking earlier about the direction for Virtual Not Distant, which is something that a lot of you have heard about before. But a personal update is that I have set up, I am in the process of setting up a small side business called Adventures in Podcasting. Because some of you might know that I really like the medium, and some of you might know that I love to do stuff with other people, and I am by nature an enabler, and I get very excited by new stuff, which is not great. And so when someone says they want to do something new, I get really excited and I want to do it with them. And I always go, hang on, Pilar, you can't join everyone in everyone's party. So if I can help people set up their own show, their own podcast, and remember a podcast at the moment is a collection of audio files you can subscribe to via RSS so that you subscribe to the episodes, then I would love to help. So what's happened is I ran, the last 2 days of running the Plan Your Podcast in 2 Weeks challenge, which has been a delight. So people have gathered, a group of 20 people have gathered on our online platform called Mighty Networks, which is a new community platform. So if you're looking for a platform to host your community, that's better than a lot of other stuff that's around. And they've been with me now for almost 2 weeks, and I have set them a task every day that helps them to plan their podcast. So they're not going to get any production done during that time, but they start to plan. And once you have the plan, you can decide whether you move forward or whether this is just going to take too much time. Because one of my missions in life, I don't have many, but one of my missions is to drop the number of podcasts that drop off after 3 episodes and that are just clogging the space. So that is what I've been doing. I've loved it. It's been free. I think I'm going to charge next time, and anyone can join that. And then Adventures in Podcasting, seeing who's turned up to the challenge, I'm going to focus that on helping trainers, coaches, and facilitators to set up their first podcast. If anyone needs help and you're not in those professions, that's fine too. But seeing as that's my network, seeing as I understand more or less where these people are coming from, then I think it's a good space for me to start. So Adventures in Podcasting, if you're interested, and you can register your interest for the next challenge if you want. So that's me. That's my personal update. But of course, it matches beautifully where we are moving virtual, not distant to, which is to help organizations set up an internal podcast. And I am so excited about this. I hope it will work. I know that there's companies that do internal podcasting. I know that there are organizations who have already their own internal podcast and they didn't need anyone to come in. What I really want to help to do is to create something that belongs to the organization, not to a layer of the organization, and also something that provides real human connection value. Of course, not everyone is going to love it, but I think that, again, this is another place where we need to rethink. How do people connect in the organization? Not how did they used to connect when they were mainly in the office, and how can we use that now, given that we're distributed or hybrid? No, we're in these new spaces. What are the new ways that people can connect in? What do you really miss from people? What do we mean? And then let's be specific. What do we mean by a water cooler chat? Is that water cooler chat about social stuff, hobby stuff, personal stuff? Is it about the work? Is it about what's going on in the organization? Is it about asking questions in a little safe space rather than in a more formal one? Let's start to be specific, because as you will have heard from the conversation with Judy, it depends what we want to do and what we want to achieve. We need to know that before we come to a solution. So part of, especially talking about the Podcasting for Connection service, is to really get organizations to think again about what it means for people to connect. People to connect doesn't always have to be in real time. We know that definitely not in the physical space, but also not always in real time in the virtual space. So the last thing I'm going to tell you about today also is that I've run a third Twitter space weekly in a row. Very small conversations, I think, with small groups of people, but wonderful conversations and very enriching. And in the one I had today, which I was mainly talking to Chris Donato during it, we looked at an article from 2017. Chris was like, I can't believe we're still talking about this. Yes, we are. And this wonderful article from the Harvard Business Review, which I think is something like why managers have to pay attention to social collaboration tools. I'll put a link in the show notes. This article is really about how we can use asynchronous online spaces for people to learn from each other. Either meta-knowledge, so knowledge that's not tangible about who knows whom, who's an expert in what in the organization, and then more explicit knowledge like, hey, I had a problem with this, can anyone help? And you read it and you also get the answer. So it really is going back to the whole concept of working out loud. But of course, this space still not been exploited. If it'd been discovered during the lockdown period, then maybe it's going to be ditched because actually, yeah, that was all very well for them, but actually now we have the physical space. However, you miss out on a lot. Anyway, I'm going off on one, so this is a bonus episode. I hope that was all right. I'm going to go now into where you can find us. Thank you very, very much for listening. virtualnotdistant.com for lots of content around leading remote teams, around online collaboration, and also check out our services. Depends when in time you're listening, maybe one thing or another. We have a newsletter you can sign up to, monthly reading and listening recommendations, virtual teamwork on Twitter with a 0 instead of an O. On Twitter, I'm Pilar Orti, and we have a LinkedIn page also, which the lovely Becky runs. So until next episode, which is with Catherine Nicholson on online workshops. So we're continuing the theme of moving stuff online. So thank you very much for listening. A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast produced by Virtual Not Distant. If you have something to add to the conversation, let us know through the contact form over at virtualnotdistant.com. I have been your host, Pilar Orti, and I'm signing off now. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.